The letter was printed on company letterhead, thick paper, the kind that costs more than it should, with the Ardent Solutions logo embossed at the top in navy and gold. Daniel Marsh noticed the paper quality because he had ordered that paper himself 3 years ago, when he was the one who handled procurement, before the company grew large enough to have a whole department for it. He noticed it the way you notice small, irrelevant details when the large ones are too heavy to look at directly. He read the letter once. Then he folded it in thirds, the way you fold something you intend to keep, and placed it in the front pocket of his jacket. It was Christmas morning, 7:42 a.m. The office was empty except for him and the 2 HR representatives sitting across the conference table, both of whom had the practiced expression of people delivering difficult news professionally, which is to say they looked sorry in a way that had been carefully calibrated to avoid liability. Daniel had been called in under the pretense of an urgent client issue. He had driven 40 minutes through light holiday traffic, past neighborhoods with lights still blinking on dark houses, past a convenience store with a single car in the lot, past the kind of quiet that only exists on Christmas morning when everyone who has somewhere to be is already there. He had driven all of it thinking about a client problem. He arrived to find termination paperwork. 11 years. That was what was being folded into thirds and placed in a jacket pocket. 11 years of arriving before everyone else and leaving after, of building systems that other people put their names on, of solving problems quietly so that the people above him could present solutions confidently. 11 years of a career that had outlasted his marriage, outlasted 2 recessions, outlasted 3 different CEOs, until this one. Richard Holt had taken over Ardent Solutions 14 months ago. He was the kind of man who used the word streamline, the way other people use punctuation, constantly, and to indicate that something was about to be removed. He wore European suits and spoke about disruption with the enthusiasm of someone who had never personally experienced being disrupted. He had looked at Daniel Marsh in their first meeting and seen, Marcus understood later, a man without performance, a man who did not sell himself, a man who, in the language Richard Holt spoke fluently, was not a fit for where we're taking this company. What Richard Holt had not seen, because he had not looked, was what Daniel Marsh actually did. The HR representatives asked if he had questions. He said no. They asked if he needed a moment. He said he was fine. He signed the separation agreement, which included a clause about non-disparagement, that he read carefully and then signed without hesitation because there was nothing he planned to say. He went back to his office, his former office, which already felt grammatically different, and packed the things on his desk into a single cardboard box. A photograph of his daughter Emma, who was 10 and was at home right now, still asleep, with Christmas presents under the tree that he had stayed up until 1 in the morning assembling. A small cactus Emma had given him 2 years ago, because she had read that cactuses were hard to kill, and she worried about him. A coffee mug with a faded logo from a company conference in 2019. He looked at the computer. He thought about something. Then he sat down, opened a folder he had been maintaining for 7 months, and spent 12 minutes doing a thing that was entirely within the terms of his employment, entirely documented and entirely deliberate. When he was done, he closed the laptop, picked up his box and his cactus, and walked out of the building. The security guard at the front desk was a man named Frank, who had worked that lobby for 6 years and knew Daniel by name. Frank looked at the box. He looked at Daniel. He said very quietly, "Merry Christmas, Mr. Marsh," and the kindness in it was so unguarded that Daniel had to look at the elevator doors to collect himself. He drove home. Emma was still asleep. He made coffee, sat at the kitchen table in the quiet of the house, and let himself feel the full weight of it. Not the anger, which was there, but underneath the anger, the thing that was harder, which was the particular exhaustion of a man who has given a large part of himself to something and then been handed it back on a Tuesday or a Christmas morning. The day didn't really change the arithmetic. He did not tell Emma that day. He let her open her presents, let her scream over the art supplies she'd been asking for since October, let her make him a Christmas card in the afternoon with her new markers. "To the best dad, even though you work too much. Love, Emma," and taped it to the refrigerator with the careful reverence it deserved. He made them breakfast for dinner because it was Christmas and the rules were suspended. He let her stay up an hour past her bedtime. When she finally fell asleep, he sat beside her bed in the dark for a while, listening to her breathe, thinking about what January was going to look like. He would figure it out. He had always figured it out. That was the part nobody at Ardent Solutions had understood about Daniel Marsh, that the reason he was calm in every crisis was not that he didn't understand the stakes. It was that he had already stood in rooms where the stakes were higher than anything that office building had ever seen, rooms where it was just him and Emma and the absence of everything they'd lost, and he had simply held. After that, most things were manageable. 3 days after Christmas, on a Wednesday morning, Richard Holt arrived at Ardent Solutions to what he later described as a situation. The situation had begun at 9:14 a.m., when the company's primary financial software, the system that processed client billing, managed internal payroll, and maintained the compliance records required by their federal contracts, stopped working. Not partially, completely. It returned a single error code that the IT department did not recognize, that the software vendor could not immediately diagnose, and that the 3 senior engineers still in the office between Christmas and New Year could not resolve. By 10 a.m., 3 clients had called. By 11, a federal contractor liaison had sent an email that used the phrase contractual compliance obligation twice in 4 sentences. By noon, Richard Holt was in the server room in his European suit asking questions that revealed to everyone present that he did not fully understand what the server room was for. Someone said Daniel Marsh's name, then someone else said it, then a third person said it, and Richard Holt said, with the slight irritation of a man who doesn't recognize a name he should, "Who is that?" The room was quiet in the specific way of people choosing their words. Daniel Marsh, it emerged in that quiet, was the person who had built the integration layer between the financial software and the federal compliance system. He had built it 4 years ago when the company had won its first government contract, stayed up for 11 days, learning a regulatory framework nobody else had bothered to understand, and created a documentation system so thorough and well organized that, theoretically, anyone should have been able to maintain it. Theoretically, because the documentation was stored in a folder on the company's internal drive in a directory that Daniel had labeled 3 years ago. With the quiet humor of a man who suspected this day might come, critical infrastructure, read before making personnel changes. Nobody had read it. Nobody had known to read it, because nobody had known the folder existed, because nobody had asked Daniel Marsh what he actually did. The folder was there. The documentation was there. What was not there? What could not be accessed without a specific decryption key that existed on Daniel Marsh's credentials that had been deactivated at 7:42 a.m. on Christmas morning, was the master configuration file that tied everything together. Richard Holt called Daniel's number at 2:17 p.m. Daniel was at the park with Emma, who was on the swings, who had no idea that anything had changed, who was asking him to push her higher. "Higher! Come on, Dad, higher!" He felt the phone buzz in his pocket. He looked at the screen. He pushed Emma on the swings for another few minutes, watching her laugh with her head thrown back against the December sky, and then he answered. Richard Holt's voice had a different quality than it had in any of their previous interactions. The performance was gone. What was left was a man in a difficult room trying to find a register between authority and supplication that would get him what he needed. Daniel listened to all of it. He said he understood. He asked for 24 hours, which he did not need but felt was reasonable. Richard said 24 hours was not possible given the compliance window. Daniel said he understood that too, and that he would need certain things in writing before he could assist. Not out of antagonism, but because he had a daughter and a mortgage and had just spent Christmas morning in a conference room, and he thought that was a reasonable position. Richard Holt agreed to everything. It took 11 minutes. Daniel had not raised his voice once. He took Emma for ice cream on the way home because she had been patient and good at the park while he was on the phone, and because it was the week between Christmas and New Year and the rules were still suspended. She got 2 scoops. He got 1. She told him a long story about something that had happened at school before the break, a story that involved 3 of her friends and a substitute teacher, and a fire drill at the wrong moment, and he listened to every word of it. That evening he logged into the system remotely, restored the configuration file, and left a clean technical note that explained exactly what he had done and why, written in language clear enough that any competent engineer could maintain it going forward. He did not make it difficult. He did not extract anything beyond what had been agreed in writing. That was not who he was, and more importantly, that was not what he wanted Emma to see, even from a distance, even in the actions of a version of him she would never directly witness. The compliance issue was resolved by 9 p.m. The Federal Liaison sent a follow-up email the following morning that included the phrase, "professionally handled," which was, in context, the highest possible compliment. What happened after that was not something Daniel had planned or anticipated, because he was not a man who spent energy on the performance of consequences. He had simply done the right thing in sequence, and then returned to the work of figuring out January. But the story moved. It moved the way stories move in offices, person to person, each telling adding texture, and by the time it reached the company's board of directors, through a channel that had nothing to do with Daniel and everything to do with the Federal Contractor Liaison, who had a relationship with one of the board members that predated Ardent Solutions by 15 years, it had become a story about something larger than a software configuration. It had become a story about what Richard Holt had not known, about the 11 years of institutional knowledge that had been walked out of the building in a cardboard box on Christmas morning, about a folder labeled Critical Infrastructure, read before making personnel changes, that had been sitting unread in plain sight, because the man who ran the company had never thought to ask the quiet man in the corner office what he actually did. Richard Holt resigned on the 29th of December. The board accepted it with a speed that indicated they had been waiting for a reason. The interim CEO who took over, a woman named Sandra Chu, who had been on the board for 4 years and had the energy of someone who had been patient for a long time, called Daniel Marsh on the 30th. She did not offer him his old job back. She offered him a different one, his own division, the title he should have had years ago, a salary that reflected, finally, what he had actually been worth to that company for 11 of its most critical years. He asked for a week to think about it. She said, "Take 2. He told Emma that night. Not all of it. She was 10, and the parts about leverage and compliance. Windows were not the parts that mattered for a 10-year-old. He told her that he had lost his job on Christmas morning, which she hadn't known, and that it had been hard, and that then something had happened, and now he had a better one. She was quiet for a moment, in the way she got quiet when she was processing something. Then she said, "Did you do the right thing? Even when it was hard?" He looked at her. "Yeah," he said. "I did." She nodded, satisfied, the way children are satisfied when the world confirms something they already believed. "Then it makes sense," she said, and went back to drawing. He sat there for a moment after she said it. He thought about Christmas morning, about letterhead and thick paper and 11 years in thirds, about a security guard who said Merry Christmas without armor, about a park and a phone call and 2 scoops of ice cream and a little girl who asked to go higher. He thought about all the quiet years of doing the right thing in empty rooms where nobody was watching, and how it turned out that doing the right thing in empty rooms still counts. It always counts. The room being empty doesn't change the arithmetic. He taped Emma's Christmas card a little straighter on the refrigerator. "To the best, Dad, even though you work too much. Love, Emma. He was going to work a little less now. He had already decided, and if you stayed until this moment, if something in this story held you, then you already know why this channel exists. We tell the stories of quiet people who do the right thing when it costs them everything, because those are the only stories worth telling. Please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it today, and subscribe to this channel so you never miss one. Your presence here, until the very last word, means more than you know. Thank you.